Welcome, Stencil fans, to another fun project. You know we always have one for you. And this one, I know you guys have been waiting long and hard for this one, is how to stencil walls. As you guys can see, we have a beautiful wall stenciled here. So you may have noticed that I'm actually working on foam core today instead of using a real wall. So to save time and get you guys started on your own wall projects at home, I wanted to show you a very small space and how to apply a wall stencil. And once you learn how to do these two panels, that's all you need. You can go ahead and start on your own wall at home. So let's get started. The first supply that you will need for this course is a wall stencil. This is about 20 inches long, and it's perfect for a wall stencil because we have a lot of ground to cover, and this is a great choice. Of course, we will always need our blue painter's tape. We're going to use a lot of it today, so make sure you have almost a full roll ready. We will also need our foam roller and our paper plate. These guys are going to work well together, and this is how we're going to apply our paint. Before we get started on our paint project, make sure that you've primed your wall with a flat interior base coat. And then make sure that you have your other paint, which is our fun blue color we're going to be choosing today, again in flat interior paint. We're also going to use our stencil brush as well, so make sure you have that on hand. So our first step for creating our wall stencil is to tape off the area in which we do not want to be stenciled. What we're talking about here is the wall that connects to another wall and also the ceiling. So I'm just going to tape with my painter's tape all around the perimeter to make sure everything is nice and neat. All right, so now my fake wall is starting to look like a real one. As you guys can see, I've taped off this area where my fake wall is kind of connected with the ceiling and other walls. Let's just remember this is just a demo, so of course you would do this in the joints of your own wall. But after this, we're going to go ahead and apply our stencil. The next step is to line up where your stencil is going to be. As you guys can see, I can either do it this way or this way. I'm not sure which way I want to do my stencil pattern, so I'm just going to play around with it before I even consider taping it down. All right, I've decided that this way looks pretty cool, so I'm going to go ahead and just take 2 pieces of tape to just lightly measure where our stencil is going to go, or visualizing our stencil on the wall before we paint it. And you may be asking yourself, well, how about if it's not even? Well, we'll get to that step in a second. I just want to make sure that we have it completely leveled down first, so then we can even consider if it's going to be straight. We can always adjust it later. After applying about 6 pieces of tape, I'm able to visualize how my stencil pattern is going to look on my wall. Now, this looks pretty good. I feel like it's pretty even, but of course, let's double check with our level. See, good thing I checked because this is actually not level. We need to bring down this side. So now that we have our stencil in place, it's time for the fun part, paint. And I'm just going to go over a couple little tricks and tidbits that you guys should know before we even start applying the paint. First things first, let's pretend that our imaginary wall already has paint on it. And what I'd like you guys to use is a flat base coat paint for interior use. And the reason why we use flat base coat interior paint for our walls is because the dry time is really fast. And also, this means that our stencil will have something to stick to, and it's just going to be a beautiful result. Now, stenciling works best on walls that are smooth to the touch, no textureness. So if you have a textured wall, don't worry, you can still stencil, but maybe using a geometric shape or something that's particularly patterned isn't the right one for you. Instead, you can use an organic type of stencil, for example, trees, flowers, something very beautiful and organic that if a little bit of stencil bleed shows through, it's not going to be a big deal. In fact, it's going to look how the stencil was supposed to be. So let's talk about stencil bleed. I talk about this a lot, and as you guys know, this is a part of the craft, and it's just something that we're going to have to deal with. And there are a little bit what we can do to prevent stencil bleed, but just remember, please do not obsess over it. Everyone and every stenciler is going to have a little bit of stencil bleed, even on the best stencil work. One way to prevent our stencil bleed is to have the correct amount of paint, and I'm going to show you just how to get it. I am working with another base coat interior paint in a different color, this beautiful blue color. And the reason why I'm choosing this type of finish is because if you have a glossy finish, it's going to take a very long time to dry. In fact, it's going to be kind of sticky, and when you're reapplying your stencil to this previous stencil, you could have some really big hiccups there. So, of course, you can use a glossy exterior paint for your stencils, but let's save that until you get a couple stenciled walls underneath your belt, because that's kind of more advanced. So we're going to take our dense foam roller here, and instead of rolling right over our paint we would normally do if we were just painting a regular wall, we're just going to slowly tap into it. Notice how I'm not going all the way into the paint. This gives us a little bit more of an even coat. And it also reduces us getting too much paint. I'm just going to keep doing this until my foam roller looks about even. Just slowly dipping into it. This looks pretty good. Next up, I'm going to make sure that we just have just the right amount of paint, and I'm going to test it out on our paper towel. Again, this takes off any excess paint and makes sure we have very minimal amount of paint. Remember, we can always add more, but it's very difficult to take away. All right, guys, are you ready for the fun part? I'm going to start off on the actual stencil part, right over here. Just to ensure that we are going to be stenciling with the right amount of paint. Again, this helps with evening our lines. And if you don't mind getting your hands dirty, of course you can kind of brace your stencil. However, it is very common to have your stencils be not so flat with the wall because of course they are bendable and movable. And notice how I'm not going up and down. This is going to help with our stencil bleed and make sure that we don't get underneath our stencil. As much as we can anyway. Just take your time with it. I'm just going to stop and show you. This is still with the same roll of paint we just applied. I haven't added any more paint to this, and I'm almost done with my stencil. Just goes to show you that little bit of paint goes a long way. We're stenciling, y'all. As you guys can see, our stencil is coming along just nicely, but there's another little trick I want to show you guys that we can use with our stencil brush. Now, stenciling this whole wall with just this little brush is crazy, and it's going to take you forever. However, I can go in there in the little corners that is harder to get with my foam roller and tighten them up. Of course, this is optional, but I think it makes it look much more finished and polished. So I'm just going to go and clean up any of these edges with my little stencil brush. Just a little reminder, how I got my correct amount of paint on my stenciling brush was by doing the same thing we did with our foam roller. First, I dipped it into the paint just a little bit, swirled it around pretty evenly, and then I dabbed it on a paper towel to really make sure that we don't have any excess paint. Now right here, I can see where I got a stencil line of more paint, and there's a little bit less paint right in the center of it. So I'm going to show you another trick. You can go in with your stencil brush and just swirl really lightly, and that's just going to blend all the paint together. Giving it a much more even coat. This is particularly helpful if your wall is textured and you may not be able to get in all those little areas with your foam roller. You can go ahead and just take some extra time to go over it with your stencil brush. I think I'm good. Just to make sure everything was even, after I stenciled up the edges, I went ahead and rolled over once more with our paint roller. So I'm going to give it about a few seconds to harden up, and then I will remove my stencil. And there we have our first panel of our stenciled wall. It looks beautiful, and yes, you can see there's a little bit of bleed around the edges here, but you're not going to see it when you put your furniture behind this wall. You have everything decorated, and also you're not going to be standing this close to a wall anyway. It's really only noticeable when you're right up close to it. So please remember, everyone has a little bit of stencil bleed. Don't obsess over it. So once your first panel has kind of dried up just a tad, we're going to add our second panel to repeat the pattern. And this part is kind of tricky, so bear with me on this part. Some stencils come with guidelines and shows you exactly where to line up your pattern. Mine doesn't. But that's okay, I'm going to show you how to do it. You see, all I did here was just line up exactly where we already stenciled, which is the last two crosses right here. And I'm just going to line them up as perfectly as I possibly can. Now, because I'm layering my stencil over our paint, we do want to make sure that this is set up just enough so it won't smear it. This is another bonus when working with flat interior paint because it dries up so quickly. Now that I was able to align my two crosses here, I know that this is perfectly even, but of course I'm going to double check with my level just to be on the safe side. Here's an important tip. I am working with my level at the very bottom of our stencil. And this is because if I put my level up here, it's going to touch our paint, and if our paint isn't dry, it's going to smear. So let's make sure to always work with our level below a stencil. Yeah, this looks perfectly even. So you guys know what's coming up next. We're going to repeat the pattern that we just did with our paint. Remember to roll it on the paper plate evenly, then take off any excess on the paper towel and apply to your stencil. I have progressed with my stencil just like how we did the first panel. And are you guys ready to see how they line up? Looks beautiful. Now, I do want to point out this little area right there. That's where my stencil accidentally got away from me. And it's okay, because if this was a real wall, all I would do is take my base coat and just touch it up. Just take a little tiny paintbrush and just get rid of it. You won't even see that. So I wanted to show that to you guys in case that happens to you. Don't fear, don't think you have to start all over. Just take a little paintbrush and just get rid of that, just like an eraser, and you will have one beautiful wall. Well guys, we have completed another fun stenciling project. What we learned today is how to place your stencil and how to keep that repeating pattern going. And you really only need me to show you 2 ways to do this, and now you can go ahead and apply that knowledge to all of your walls. Today's project is going to be all about stenciling on floors. And depending what type of floor you have different types of things that you need to work with. For example, if you want to stencil on the outside concrete of your home, you need to do a little bit more preparation work before you can get to this tutorial.